The New International Version translates that last verse, verse 7, to say, anyone who has died has been set free from sin. Made me think of public executions for some reason. And I heard this myth once, that if an execution goes bad, like say they flip the switch on the electric chair and the power goes out right before that, if the execution goes bad, then the person is set free. Have you heard that myth before? Well, apparently it's not true. In fact, the actual law says that a person is supposed to suffer the method of execution until death. Because the sin, the crime, is not paid for until death is all the way done. I think we know that inherently. There's a lot of us who kind of sense that, death is sort of the final escape. And we live in a society right now where suicide is actually on the rise. I read this article. It was published back in October. I read it more recently. That said, among people in Japanese, among the Japanese people in Japan, during the 1998 financial crisis, the number of suicides in Japan surged 34% compared to the previous year. 34%. In 97, it soared 40% among men and 20% for women. And then Time magazine just this month published an article where they were saying that they were shocked at this statistic. Check this out. It said, see if I can find it here. It said that, there it is. Warning signs are already erupting in parts of the U.S. hit hard by the housing crisis. In Los Angeles, calls into the Suicide Prevention Call Center, run by the D.D. Hirsch Community Mental Health Center, spiked 65% in the second half of 2008. Calls to the prevention center, the Suicide Prevention Center, spiked 65% in the second half of 2008. Death is the final out. And some people have thought about it improperly because they think they need to die. When the reality is, Jesus has already died. And what Paul is telling us in Romans 6 is that we can grasp that death and move through and beyond whatever bondage, whatever slavery, whatever sin we have, to the other side where there is nothing left but freedom. I can't emphasize this enough, that if you have received Christ into your life, then you already are free. For many years, I struggled personally with habitual kind of mental sin. And I wrestled with it a lot. And when I was a teenager in high school and then later on, and I kept saying, God, this is something that I don't really want to deal with. I want you to just let it go. I want you to take it away from me. And when I was in college, I had an experience where someone said these words from Romans 6. And I read them and I looked at them and I recognized, wait a minute, I'm already free. Why do I keep begging God to take away something that's already gone? The more I beg for Him to take it away, the more I keep thinking about it, the more I'm realizing it's still there. But you know what? It's actually gone. I just keep borrowing from the past into my present. It's done. I'm free. And every time that temptation or thought came back again, I would just simply say, you know what? I don't have to. I'm free. I could just move on with the rest of my day. I could do whatever I wanted because I was free. I didn't have to do the stuff that I didn't want to do. It's making sense? Jesus died. And He didn't die so we could walk around dead. He died so that we could go through His death and experience life on the other side. That doesn't mean that freedom is always easy. Freedom is a struggle. Check out what Paul says in Galatians 5:1. He says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Jesus wants to set you free from your sin. He died so that your sin could be forgiven. He rose again so that you could share in his life. Your sin has been paid for. It's been taken care of. And if you're connected with him, you are completely, totally, utterly freed from it. But that doesn't mean that the memory has left. That doesn't mean that the habits have miraculously disappeared. It doesn't mean that everything you've done over the last few years to train yourself in that particular behavior or thought pattern or belief system or whatever is automatically gone. Because we've trained ourselves to be sinners. We've done very well at it. We've practiced and practiced and practiced, and many of us in this room have perfected it. But he wants to set us free. And the freedom process is just as much of a perfection process as it was to get to where we were. Freedom is a struggle. So Paul says, do not let yourselves be burdened again. So let's get practical. I want to just give us a couple things that I think are practical ways of living out the promise of freedom. Hopefully this is clicking with you, and if it doesn't, maybe it will in the next few weeks. But let's start with getting practical with what Jesus said. Jesus told them in John chapter 8, he said, "If you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciple, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Here's my claim based on that. You can see Jesus is doing two things there. He says, if you hold to my teaching, number one, that's obedience. And number two, you will know the truth. There are two parts for freedom. These are the two parts. Freedom is created and protected when we obey Jesus and learn the truth. You see, I believe there are two forces that wage war against us and our freedom. And those two forces are these. Number one, our habits and our practices and our sinful patterns of behavior. That wages war against our freedom. Because every time we fall back into that stuff, we feel trapped again, and we can believe that we are trapped in those things. Which is the second thing that wages war against our freedom. Simply false belief. Or I would phrase it this way, an unclaimed thought. The Apostle Paul says that he has taken every one of his thoughts captive to make it a slave of Jesus. I think that's an amazing picture. But here's the deal. Many of us have thought patterns and ways of processing things and belief systems in our lives that are just simply not based